Hey guys, the WalterFootball.com After Dark Show for February 19, 2025. We're going to be discussing Aaron Rodgers. The Jets have announced that they're going to move on from him. They said, they said good riddance to him after 2 seasons, really 1 season. And so we're going to discuss how the Jets, from a Jets fan slash person who covers the Jets perspective, like how that second season went, what's going to become of the Jets, where Aaron Rodgers is going to go, and also the rest of the AFC East. So before we intro our co-host for tonight, please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video, visit the link in the description for the merch store. As always, I'm wearing a Walter Football t-shirt. It's a navy blue shirt. It is part of our great winter collection at the merch store, and you can get it here, as you can see on the screen. There are a ton of t-shirts. I promised some new shirts and some new mugs. For some reason, they haven't posted it yet. I hope they do it soon because I really like some of the shirts. I hope they haven't deleted them. So I don't want to go through that again. But yeah, you can get these shirts, and you may not notice, like, there's no dark blue here. You can actually change the color of any shirt. So you just go in and change the color. So it's pretty cool. You have a lot of options, and everything's 15% off. You can go to Amazon as well, buy my books. Jerks of the College Years is the most recent one. I just made fun of people I met at Penn State. So I think you guys might get a kick out of that. Speaking of Aaron Rodgers, there's a book I've written called How the 2020 MVP Was Stolen. It's a story about how Brett Favre tried to steal Aaron Rodgers' MVP. True story. You guys might want to read it if you haven't heard it. It's quite the tale. Please consider super chats, super stickers. That's the best way to support the show. We've had some great super chats for the previous week. Slew, John Sanders, the boss. Before that, we had Alan Stafford, Cam McNeagle. Like, you guys have been so awesome with your contributions. So just really appreciate it. And please consider continue helping the show because we make nothing on YouTube ads. So it's all you guys. So thank you so much for all your contributions. All right, we're joined once again by Scott Mason from Play Like a Jet. And I should note that Scott was our first ever co-host here on the WalterFootball.com After Dark Show. So Scott comes back. I think this is the fourth time you're on. Scott, so how's everything going? How are you?
Hey man, I got a question for you. Can
Sure.
we do the, I guess you would call it content creator version of a jersey swap? Where's my WalterFootball.com t-shirt? I'll trade you a Play Like a Jet shirt.
Sure. I'll do it. I'll wear it on the show too. So we'll have to set that up. So yeah, we'll do that after the show. But yeah, how's everything? How's the season? I mean, I'm on your show most Fridays, so But how the 2024 season treat you as the someone who covers the Jets?
Well, this is the best way I could put it. Feeling the way that Jets fans probably feel right now after the last 2 years. If I were to tell you to take your, let's say, private parts, stick them inside a door, and then slam that door as hard as you can, about 10 times in a row, and then times that by about 1,000, you'd still be about 1,000 times less painful than what Jets fans feel like right now.
So it wasn't. In other words, it wasn't a pleasant season. I take it.
No, it was not good. You know what it is, Walt, and I've had this discussion before. A lot of people know this about me. I'm a bit of a Jets historian, which is probably one of the saddest things you can be in this world. But I've said many times, talking about different seasons and different coaches and regimes and things, a lot of times people are prisoners of the moment, right? So I've heard people say things like Adam Gase was worse than Rich Kotite. No, he wasn't. Robert Saleh was worse than Adam Gase. No, he wasn't.
No.
Whatever. You could go down the line, right? I think you could make a strong case that this is one of the most disappointing seasons in Jets history. And the reason is because when you look at the expectations to results ratio, and especially when you consider that the Jets didn't have the type of major injuries. Like, look, 99 was insanely disappointing, but that's because Vinny Testaverde was lost in the first game.
Right.
So, yeah, it was disappointing, but there's a reason why it happened, right? And you could go down the line. I could come up with a variety of different seasons that were disappointing. 1986 ended in major disappointment with the marathon by the lake, the Jets blowing a 10-point lead with 5 minutes left. And if they'd gotten past that, I'm almost positive they get to the Super Bowl because they had blown out the Broncos earlier in the year. But the reason why this one was so tough is because everybody thought that with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, and especially if I would have told you later on they were going to get Devontae Adams and all this other stuff, that they would at least be a legitimate playoff contender. At worst, they'd be playing for a playoff spot late in the season at the very worst.
Mhm.
And that didn't even come close to happening. The season was over by Thanksgiving. It was a disaster. Aaron Rodgers was bad. I know he had a couple of games here and there where you saw shades of the old Aaron Rodgers, but by and large, he was one of the worst starters in the league. And it was just terrible. They fired Robert Saleh, who was a bad head coach, and Jeff Ulbrich took over, and he was worse. Hassan Reddick was brought in because they wanted that home run hitter at pass rusher. He held out half the season, and then when he came back, he wasn't good. I could go down an entire list. I joke that you could do a 30 for 30 on the 2 years with Aaron Rodgers, but you could probably do a 30 for 30 just on the 2024 season. So it was an absolute mess. And you know this, Walt, because not only do you cover the entire league for a living, but also you were on my show, as you mentioned, pretty much weekly throughout the season. And so you knew what was going on with this. And you didn't feel it as much as Jets fans did, obviously, because you were kind of detached. But man, it was bad. It was just, like I said, the expectations to results ratio was as bad as I've ever seen with this team.
I can only recall one team that was maybe as disappointing for maybe not for me because I didn't like them as much, but for the public, I thought that was it the 2011 Eagles, the Vince
Yeah.
Young, the super team, whatever you call them. I think that's the only comparison you could possibly make. I was pretty shocked. I had the Jets winning the division. Now, like I did have some good calls, but the Jets winning the division was a truly awful one. They didn't even come close. And the second time they played the Bills, first time was competitive. They could have won that game. Second time was a massacre, and we had a running joke whenever I was on your show. I was like, "Yeah, this game is so important." We don't talk about like, yeah, this is for all the marbles here toward the end. Um, was there at any point during the season, or I should say, at what point during the season did you realize like, oh man, this is not gonna go well? Because they started 2-1. Was there a certain moment, or is maybe it was just like kind of like descending into like the team depression or something? But was there a specific moment where you're like, oh man, this team sucks. Like they're not going to go to the playoffs.
There were a couple of moments where I started to get nervous and then it would build. So the first one was I actually went on the road to Foxborough for Jets Patriots. And if you recall, and you sort of reference this, the Jets blew the Patriots out the first time.
Yep.
And then the second time, they blew a lead late and lost to a terrible Patriots team that had Jacoby Brissett in there because Drake May had gotten hurt early in the game. And that was bad because everyone knew that Patriots team was one of the worst in the league. And then that game on Sunday Night Football when they had just acquired Devontae Adams and they got
Yep.
destroyed by the Steelers, that was another one. There was some temporary hope. Halloween when the Jets beat the Texans and you looked at it and said, wow, this is what this could look like.
Hmm.
But I think the game that really pushed me in the direction of this season is absolutely going nowhere is the Arizona Cardinals blowout when they lost that one November 10th. I think that was when, because there was a little bit of hope before that. They blew out the Texans and all of a sudden, okay, maybe they got something going here. And then they go on the road and get murdered by the Cardinals like that. And you just realize this is pretty much done with. It's over. And at that point, you start to think to yourself, well, what are the ramifications of Rodgers coming back? Does it even make sense for him to try and come back for another year? And then you start to think about draft position. And then you look at the draft and realize that it's sort of depressing because this is a really bad, and obviously this is your domain, Walt. It's a
Yep.
really bad top part of the draft, especially if you're looking for a quarterback, but just in general, this is just not one of the stronger. For example, Tatiana McMillan, who I do like, is probably more of a really good number two receiver. And I've had people talk to me about this, and I think you could make a credible case that if he was in the draft the year that Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave, and Jamison Williams were in it, you could make a credible case he's the fifth receiver in that particular draft. again, it's nothing against McMillan. It's just this is the way the draft goes. You're hearing people credibly talk about Tyler Warren as a possibility at number 7 for the Jets, and I don't think he's anywhere close to the player that Brock Bowers was coming out of Georgia, and Bowers went 11th. So you look at it and you go, okay, well, maybe there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and then you look at that end of the rainbow, and there's not even a pot of gold there. So this is just so bad in every way, man. It was terrible. It was tough to take because at worst, you thought, okay, if Rodgers could be a league average quarterback, this team could be a playoff contender. Rodgers wasn't a league average quarterback, and this team wasn't a playoff contender by any stretch. And everything went downwards. And I think part of it is, and you and I have talked about this, some of us were guilty of vastly overrating the roster. Now, I thought that they would be a playoff contender, so that was where I thought the roster was at. There were a lot of people that had the Jets as like a legit Super Bowl contender. I wasn't going that far. But boy, this roster just wasn't anywhere near as good as we had hoped, and Rodgers certainly wasn't anywhere near as good as we hoped, and everything just went about as bad as you could have asked for it to go. I mean, you want to talk about worst case scenario? This was worst case scenario on steroids.
No, it really was. It's. I agree with you what you said about that Arizona game because you could make excuses for all the other losses. You know, like when they lost. I'm not going to even talk about the first game. You know, there's Aaron Rodgers' real first game with the team. So like they lose to the Denver 10-9, but that was right before they were heading out to London. So they were unfocused. There was crazy rain in that game. Like whatever. I mean, the kicker missed field goals. Like they could have won that game. The Jets outgained the Broncos in that game 248 to 186. So like I feel like they were the better team. They just lost that game. And then they go to London. They get blown up in Minnesota. But Minnesota turned out to be a really good team. Like they're 14-3. So like
Right.
that's nothing to be ashamed of, you know. And then they play the Bills on Monday Night Football. They nearly win that game. You know, we've talked about it ad nauseum on here. You know, like the Jets had so many opportunities to win that game. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Bills had opportunities to make the lead bigger, but still, like that game really could have gone either way. So you mentioned the Steelers game. So that was 37-15. The Jets were up 15-6 in that game. That was like one of the most bizarre, turnarounds I've seen in a game where
Yeah.
like the Jets seemed, even though it was like 15-6, just a 9-point lead, it seemed like the Jets were in full control of that game. And then like the Steelers just roared back with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson just like torched that secondary. It was unbelievable. But still, you expect like the Jets are on the road. It's Devontae Adams' first game. Steelers are a good team. They made the playoffs this year, so you can at least make an excuse for that. You mentioned the blown lead to the Patriots, but that was before a Thursday night game. I as a bettor, I love fading teams heading into Thursday night games when they're favored because like those teams just really are not focused. So and plus they blew out the Patriots the first time, so I thought that they just didn't bring their A game. And so you keep making excuses here. They beat the Texans on Halloween. It's not an impressive showing. It's only an 8-point win over a Texans team that didn't have any receivers except for one. But still, it's still a win. But then you get to that Arizona game, and it was 31-6. Like the Jets did not even show up. They got outgained by 200 yards. It was like 3.5 more yards per play for Arizona. It was just like so one sided, and it just looked like the Jets quit. And they feel like they knew that the season was over, even though it was only week 10 at that point. So
Right.
I'm totally on board with that. Like that was when I think that most people knew, which makes the following thing weird is because the Jets were favored by 4 the next week against Indianapolis, and they
Right.
ended up losing outright. So I don't know. Maybe that next one is like for like the few doubters are like, well, no, the Jets can still do this, and like yeah, the
Well,
Colts beat them by one.
if I had to guess on that one, Walt, I would think it's probably because the Jets were home and Anthony Richardson was starting and he'd been so bad that year. So that's probably what the gamblers and the sharps and all that in Vegas were thinking. But yeah, it was so funny because so many times, right? We saw these games that were on the table late or looked winnable on paper and it just never worked out. You even mentioned that Vikings game, and the Jets had a chance to win that game late.
Yeah.
And you had that drop by Mike Williams, although it was a bad pass by Aaron Rodgers, honestly. And funny enough, that was one of the warning signs, too, is look, I've defended Aaron Rodgers more than most in the sense that I think people give him too much of a hard time for stupid stuff. Like, I don't really care that he goes on McAfee or any of these other things, But that
Tucker, as
comment,
Patrick's pointing out here, yeah.
yeah, that comment he made about Mike Williams was not good. And I remember getting people yelling at me on Twitter about it because I said, look, he just hung his teammate out to dry. Like, what is he doing? And then people were like, he didn't, Mike Williams is fine with it, blah, 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 blah. He's holding him accountable. And of course, I said, look, Mike Williams said what he had to say. He was playing the good soldier, but of course he didn't like that. You don't have to be a rocket. They're like, oh, did you talk to him? It's like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. And then, of course, I also said, and people challenged me on this, and I was right about this too, that Rodgers was done with Mike Williams. He didn't trust him anymore. And we know what happens if you read Ian O'Connor's book on Aaron Rodgers, Out of the Darkness. They call it being sent to the island. When Rodgers loses trust in you or turns on you or whatever you want to call it, he sends you off to the island where you're exiled and you're done and he wants nothing to do with you. And you could tell that was what happened with Williams after that. And so you knew it was only a matter of time before the Jets were going to trade him because Rodgers wasn't going to go to him anymore. And that's what happened. And then obviously, like I said, Williams was annoyed by the comments that Rodgers made because you remember after he made that touchdown catch for the Steelers, he posted on Instagram and he wrote something about a red line, which is a reference to what Rodgers had said on McAfee. So that was the thing that I was the most upset about with Rodgers was those comments. But again, there were so many games that were close, and I had people say, well, Rodgers played well enough for them to win these games, and the defense wilted or they missed a kick or whatever. And I said, look, here's the deal, though. The offense was 25th in the league. Rodgers was near the bottom in almost all these the key efficiency metrics. The issue is if Rodgers is playing better, that game's not even close enough for it to come down to a field goal or a late defensive stand or whatever it is. And so, yeah, theoretically, you could make that argument. But the reality is Rodgers didn't play well. And I'm not blaming him solely. It's not all his fault. There were a lot of people that were at fault here. But the fact is, if Rodgers had been more like an average quarterback than a bottom, let's say, 10 quarterback, then it's a different discussion. But he wasn't. And then the other parts of the roster weren't as good as we had hoped for. And look, there's a lot of discussions that have to be had here. Brees Hall is a guy who is very disappointing for most of the year. I thought that, I think a lot of times what happens, Walt, with players like him is he had a great rookie year, then he got hurt, and then people sort of held on to that image of him that
Mhm.
maybe doesn't exist anymore. Look, he's a perfectly fine player, but I don't think he's the elite player that Jets fans expected him to be. And now we'll see what they end up doing. I mean, look, they do have Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, but Brees Hall's going into the last year of his deal, and you know this better than most. This is a very deep running back draft. So we'll see what happens. But like you said, that Arizona game, I think, was the one that really drove the point home. But there were so many times before and after that game where the Jets had plenty of opportunities to win, but at a certain point, you could just tell they didn't have it in them. Now, people can blame the coaches or whatever, but it was a collective team effort to be that bad.
It really was. Real quick, Cassandra says Rogers took away Mike Williams' cookies. There's someone who's read. There's someone who's read that how the 2020 MVP was stolen. So thank you, Cassandra. Um, anyway, so I was pretty surprised. I mean, everyone was surprised. I think, right? Well, for the most part. I mean, there were some people who may have called this, but what do you think? Like went wrong? Like there may have been a lot, but like is there anything they could have done to kind of avoid this calamity of the season? Because like they went 7-10 in 2023 with Zach Wilson. Like and Aaron Rodgers, as bad as Aaron Rodgers played this year, he was still better than Zach Wilson was. So like, what do you like? What do you attribute this decline to? Like what happened exactly?
Well, Walt, first of all, I have to correct you. It was Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Simeon in 2023. So it wasn't just Zach, it was all of
Fading
them.
Tim Boyle. Fading Tim Boyle was such free money. I miss him. Like I know we got him this year too, but that was only like he came in as a backup. Like we didn't know he was going to start, but like when it was announced that he's going to start that Black Friday game, like I loaded up so much on the Dolphins. It was crazy.
What Jets fan will ever forget the fail Mary? By the way, I'll never forget sitting there and watching that and laughing as it happened. People were like, I was so mad. I wasn't mad. I just thought it was hilarious. What else could you do but laugh at that play? Listen, I think it was just one of those things where everything that could go wrong went wrong, right? So Rodgers wasn't as bad as Zach Wilson. And I think this is part of the problem. The Jets have had such bad quarterback play the last few years, whether it was Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, ironically, who both became better elsewhere, or Sanchez after those two AFC championship appearances where he was exposed as really just not being all that good of a quarterback, right? Zach Wilson was very bad, and you can list all the other guys that made starts at a certain point in time, but Rodgers was a bottom 10 quarterback. And there are Jets fans that have their expectations so low because of the other guys that it got to a point where they're like, oh, Rodgers was actually pretty good. He threw this many touchdowns and this many yards, but they're not comparing it against the other quarterbacks in the league. So, right then and there, you have a team that was quarterbacked by a bottom 10 QB in 2024. So better than Wilson, but still not very good. Then you go to the fact that, like I said, Brees Hall was a major disappointment this past year, right?
Mhm.
The defense was significantly worse. Now, I think they got even worse when Ulbrich took over as head coach because when Ulbrich was the defensive coordinator, he could put his full focus on that. But as we know, Walt, very few guys can handle being both a coordinator and a head coach at the same time. You could count them on your hand, the guys that can do that. And Jeff Ulbrich was not prepared. Now, listen, to be fair to Ulbrich, he was thrown into this with no warning or anything. And maybe if he'd been given the job in the offseason, things could have gone somewhat better. But we'll never know that. What I can say is Ulbrich himself has admitted that he made a mistake. He said it at his intro presser when he went back to Atlanta to be the defensive coordinator. Isn't it funny, by the way, Walt, that when 2020 wrapped up, Robert Saleh was the defensive coordinator for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, and Jeff Ulbrich was the defensive coordinator under interim and now permanent head coach Raheem Morris in Atlanta. And it's like we took a time warp. We went in a DeLorean and went back in time to 2020 because they're right back to where it was. Raheem Morris is back to being the head coach in Atlanta after Arthur Smith was fired. Ulbrich is his defensive coordinator again, and Saleh is back with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. But so you look at the coaching, it was terrible. The defense clearly regressed. And I think part of it too is they expected to have Hassan Reddick there all season to make up for the losses of guys like John Franklin Myers and Quentin Jefferson and guys like that. And that didn't happen. And as we know, John Franklin Myers went on and had a Pro Bowl caliber season in Denver. The defensive line was just not, there was just nothing there on that defensive line. They brought in Javon Kinlaw, who was not good, and Quentin Williams was basically taking double, triple, quadruple teams all season. Uh, then there were other players that weren't quite as good this past year. DJ Reed started out good, and then he dovetailed for a while, and then he picked it back up the last couple of games. I suspect probably because he realized he was hitting free agency and he really wanted to make an impact down the stretch. Sauce Gardner was, contrary to popular opinion, was still very good this past year, but he wasn't anywhere near as good. He was closer to like the to a top 10 corner than what he was before, which was arguably the best corner. I think part of it is the referees started to call things differently for him. They were calling penalties that they hadn't called before. So he was forced to be a little less aggressive. And I think his game suffered a little. His tackling certainly has never been the strong point for him, but that wasn't very good this past year either. Tremaine Johnson got hurt, so that didn't help. But the edge rush was not great. I mean, Will McDonald had a nice year, but he had what I like to call a Vic Beasley type of season where a lot of his sacks were unblocked or going up against a running back or something like that. So definitely a good year, but I want to see if he winds up duplicating that. I think he may wind up being a Yannick Ngakwe type where He's not very useful against the run, but at least he can be good in certain pass rush situations. So when you look at all of those things and you combine them, it was a recipe for regression. Plus, they had some tougher games on their schedule than they originally thought. The game against Minnesota, everybody thought Minnesota was going to be bad. Like you said, Minnesota turned out to be a good team. There were other games that on paper looked more winnable than they actually were. Although ironically, one of those was not San Francisco because they turned out to be bad too. So I
Sure.
just think it was a Murphy's Law situation where the worst possible thing happened in so many different areas, and the Jets just couldn't get on track. And look at all the one score games they lost. That was a big part of it too. And I, again, that was on coaching, but also we overestimated what this team really was going to be.
So with the defensive regression, and you mentioned it, like Jeff Ulbrich being in over his head, as, in a surprise situation. Would you like if they never fired Robert Saleh? Do you think? I mean, do you envision that the defense would have been a lot better? Like maybe not like what it was in 2023, but do you think it would have definitely been better?
I think it would have been better than it was. I don't think it would have been as good as 2023 because, like I said, I think the sauce stuff didn't really have to do with coaching. And obviously, the Hassan Reddick thing created sort of a chain reaction because Jermaine Johnson got hurt, so he was out, and you figure, all right, well, Will McDonald was playing better, so then you have Hassan Reddick, and Reddick didn't show up till halfway through the year, and then they lost a lot of key players on that defensive line, like I said, and I think a lot of people looked past that. They
Hmm.
just thought it wasn't going to be a big deal. John Franklin Myers and players. Look, John Franklin Myers now 4 years in a row has played in 17 games and had 50 pressures or more. That's not elite. I'm not trying to say that, but it's a very good player. And well, I thought it wasn't going to be a big deal because I thought they had Hassan Reddick, but it turned out they didn't have Hassan Reddick. So I do think the defense would have been better, and I think maybe the Jets would have won another game or two. But I still think you're looking at maybe 7 wins instead of five. And at the end of the day, so what? Really, it was just it was very disappointing in all ways imaginable. And now they have to look to see what comes next and what they're going to try to do. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah. Speaking of that, like what comes next? John Sanders saying this is depressing. It's
Yeah,
like that, like the Curb Your
I'm.
Enthusiasm episode where the Jets fan offs himself because because of how the Jets have performed. It's so sad that like I
Yeah,
bet it feels like I feel this is almost like a yearly event for you guys. But
and I'm sorry, John. I don't mean to be depressing.
well, he's asking what if Aaron Glenn turns his team around? I like him more in style.
Yep.
What do you think about the Aaron Glenn hiring?
Well, I saw your grade on it, and I thought you were a little harder than I am. I actually really love Aaron Glenn, and so you probably know this. For those that are readers of your site, listeners, or viewers of the show, they may not know when the Jets are doing a coaching or general manager search, and God help me, unfortunately, in the soon to be 8 years that I have been doing Play Like a Jet, they've done that more than I would have liked. But uh, I do in depth deep dives where we research each of these candidates and we talk to different people and get a better idea of what the Jets would be in for if they were to hire these guys. So I did that with the coaching search in 2019. I did it again in 2021. I did it with the general manager search in 2019. Yeah, because Gase shoved McCagnon out the door. But the thing is, with those searches, they were far less extensive. They interviewed, and they were one at a time. So this is the first time they did both at the same time, and they did like 15 or 16 per job opening. So I had my hands full digging in on these guys. But what I will say is, when the Jets hired Robert Saleh in 2021, they interviewed Aaron Glenn. And I remember thinking, I loved Aaron Glenn as a player, but he's a defensive backs coach. What are they interviewing him for a head coaching job for?
Hmm.
And then I dug in on him, and I remember being impressed and saying, well, I don't think he's head coaching material now, but a couple of years from now, I think he's got a good chance if he keeps on this track, you know? And sure enough, when it came around this time, and I go mostly on the research I do because I dig in deep on these guys. I call around, I do shows with some of these shows are, generally, Walt, my shows are 20 to 40-minute shows usually because they're 7 days a week. But with these candidate shows, they could be longer. The Aaron Glenn one was significantly longer than that. Of the guys that they wound up interviewing, Glenn was my number one choice. And I think the biggest reason is there's so much to like about him, starting with the fact that he's basically been preparing for this for 27 years, or 28 years, actually, really. And people will say, well, what do you mean? He was a player. But what I mean by that is that Bill Parcells started really preparing him for this when he got to the Jets in 97. And there are a lot of different stories about their relationship, and they still talk regularly. It's well known that Parcells often will call Aaron Glenn on a Monday morning after a game and chew him out if he did something wrong or whatever. But essentially, the short version of this is in 97 when Parcells came in, everybody told Aaron Glenn, you're 5'8.5". Parcells likes bigger corners. He's going to get rid of you. And Aaron Glenn was stewing about it, and he finally went into Parcells' office and he confronted him about it. And Aaron Glenn has told this story, including at the intro presser. And he said, Coach, listen, if you're going to trade me, just tell me now. And Parcells said, look, I would trade my own wife for the right deal. Everybody's available for the right price. He's like, but if you show me you're capable of playing the way that I think you are, you won't have to worry about it. So go out there and show me why I shouldn't trade you. And Aaron Glenn said, okay, that's pretty direct. And he went out there, and we know the story. Ended up becoming, he was already an excellent corner, but he became an all pro. And Bill Parcells had a variety of different ways that he would motivate and manipulate players. And I had Victor Green, who was one of Aaron Glenn's teammates in the secondary, led the league in tackles. I believe it was in 1996. I can't remember exactly what year, but Victor Green led the NFL in tackles, the entire NFL. Anyway, he was telling these stories too, but essentially Parcells would do things like during the week, he'd say, all right, we're playing the Patriots. You're going up against Terry Glenn. I'm going to give you safety help.
Mhm.
And he'd say, Coach, I don't need safety help. I got him. And he's like, no, I think you need safety help. I don't think you can take him one-on-one. And he's like, Coach, I don't need safety help. I can take him one-on-one. Parcells said, all right, let's see what you do in practice. And that was Parcells' way. He knew that Aaron Glenn would get upset. It would get under his skin. So he would practice his butt off all week. And then when he would get to the game, he would shut down whoever the receiver was. And Glenn would use a similar technique on Marshawn Lattimore when he was in New Orleans. He would say, you're going up against Mike Evans. I'm going to give you safety help. And he'd say, I don't need safety help. I got him. No, I think you need safety help. I'm going to have a safety. And he'd say, no. And then Marshawn Lattimore would practice hard during the week to show Aaron Glenn and Dennis Allen and obviously Sean Payton that he didn't need safety help. And there was another story about the dollhouse, the famous story that they had a dollhouse, and Parcells would take a doll, and he would say this doll represents whoever Glenn was covering that week. If this guy goes over a certain amount of yards and touchdowns and catches in that game, this guy goes in your house. He's taken over your house. And so Aaron Glenn would be motivated to keep that guy out of his house. And then what would happen was after the game, if Glenn held that guy under the thresholds, Parcells would cross the name off, and the doll would be dispersed. And so he used to look forward to making Parcells have to cross those names off. And anyway, the short version of this is Aaron Glenn got out of football, and he opened a couple of businesses, and he was doing well. But he felt guilty, 15 years on the road as an NFL player. He's not home for his kids. He's not home for his wife.
Right.
And so he's trying to be a good dad and a good husband. And then maybe 2 years into retirement, he's watching football on TV, and he's got his hands on his hips, and he's yelling and he's whatever. And his wife says, baby, I know you're trying. Please just go coach. And he's like, what? And she's like, I know that's what you want to do. Go coach. Calls Parcells. Parcells says, okay, yeah, I'll make a phone call for you, but I want you to be a scout first. And he said, but coach, I don't want to be a scout. I want to be a coach. And he said, yeah, I got you, but we're doing this my way. And if you're going to be a great coach, which I think you can be, you are going to learn every single aspect of this game. You're going to be a scout. You're going to learn body types. You're going to learn different systems, schemes. You're going to go on the road. You're going to learn that part of the business. And Arce, he took Glenn under his wing, not just making the call to Mike Tannenbaum and getting him in as a scout, but during the summers, Aaron Glenn would travel down to Florida and they basically do coaching boot camp for a week. They would go over all different scenarios. What would you do if it's 3rd and 3 on the 30-yard line? The score is this. It's game number whatever in the season. How would you handle the referee when this call gets made? If ownership comes to you and asks you such and such, what would you do? How would you handle disciplining this player if they did this in this particular scenario? Like, literally, he was preparing him all the way through. And so then, he takes that first coaching job in Cleveland as an assistant defensive backs coach under Mike Patton, who he'd cross paths with the Jets. And then from there, he goes to the Saints and he works for Sean Payton. And then Dan Campbell thinks of enough of him to take him with him as a defensive coordinator to the Lions. And I think when you look at what people say about him, and this is the thing, Walt, you know this, you've been around quite a while around the NFL game. It's one thing when you hear an endorsement, right? So, like, everybody points back to, oh, well, uh, look at what Peyton Manning said about Adam Gase. Okay, fine. Here's the thing Bill Parcells is his mentor, right? But also, Sean Payton won't shut up about him. And Peter Schrager said that. Peter Schrager said being around Sean Payton when they worked together, the two guys that Peyton would never shut up about behind the scenes. So this is not something he was doing just to gas up his guy. Were Aaron Glenn, who he said was going to be the next great head coach, and Bill Parcells, who he worshipped, right?
Mhm.
Chris Spielman, Schrager told the story about Spielman talking about Glenn and how nobody knows more ball or anything than Aaron Glenn. Dan Campbell wouldn't shut up about Aaron Glenn, right? Bill Belichick almost hired Aaron Glenn in 2018 to be his defensive coordinator. I think that was when Patricia left to be the head coach of the Lions. I could be mistaken, but I think that's what it was. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but Belichick is also very complimentary of Aaron Glenn. Pete Carroll, who drafted Aaron Glenn or had a role in drafting Aaron Glenn when Carroll was the head coach in the one year in 1994, he's spoken very highly of Glenn and has remained very close with him to this day. So it's one thing to be like, oh, well, who cares if Bill Parcells liked him? But when it's Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, Sean Payton, Dan Campbell, Chris Spielman, this is what we refer to as a pattern, right? And I could get into a variety of different stories about the way that he's coached and how he's learned analytics and all his, he'd sit in on special teams meetings and all these other things. But I think what I loved about Aaron Glenn is that, like I said, he's been preparing for this job for a really long time and he's been really good where he's gone, and he's gone out of his way to learn things that had nothing to do with his job at that time because he wanted to be a head football coach. So I love Aaron Glenn, and I think he's going to do a really good job here, knock on wood. The issue, of course, is, and he and Darren Muji, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, Walt, went to great lengths to say that this is not about 2024, 2025. This is a long-term project. What they want to do is what Bill Parcells did when he came in here with the Jets. The Jets were a laughing stock, and Parcells put the pieces in place to basically have a sustainable program for a dozen years. For 13 years, from 1997 to 2010, the Jets were generally, I mean, look, there were a few bad years, but generally they were pretty good. The Lions, their turnaround, the Saints, and what Sean Payton built there. He wants to be the guy that turns this around, and he's got a very personal stake in this. And he talked about the press conference. He said, "Look, I interviewed for a lot of jobs. I wanted this job. I wanted the Jets, and I wanted to come back here and finish what I started as a player. Basically, they went to the AFC Championship game under Bill Parcells, and he wants to finish the job that Parcells started all those years ago. So I love the hire, and I want to see what the vision is. But now it starts with 2025 and builds out. I know you didn't love it because, and I understand a lot of people have this point of view. They prefer offensive coaches, and I understand that. But I think Aaron Glenn really look. There's something to be said for the fact that this is a guy that had a lot of options, and this is the job that he wanted. And I think also realistically they needed somebody that understands what this job entails, right? It's There's a stench on this franchise. He's a guy that's worked with Woody as a scout, and he was here as a player when Woody had bought the team. This is a guy who learned under Parcells, and he was here for the bad, and he was here when it turned around and was good. He knows what it's like to deal with the media here, with the fans. So there's just a lot here that he brings to the table that's unique to the other candidates that interviewed for the job.
Well, you sold me. I should probably adjust my grade. No, you made a lot of great points there. No, I obviously did not know everything involved there, and you brought up the reason why I was slightly down on it. Like I didn't give it a bad grade or anything. It just
No, 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 no.
yeah. So like the problem to expound on what you said about the offensive coaches, like generally if you have a young quarterback, and the Jets don't really, but they eventually will.
You
If
hope.
you we'll see, we'll see. If you have a young quarterback and you have a defensive coach and the offensive coordinator does a great job with that young quarterback, some team's going to hire that offensive coordinator, and then you're going
Sure.
to have to find a new offensive coordinator, which means a new system, unless you promote from within. But still, there is still an adjustment period there. And then if that
Mm,
offensive coordinator does a good job, they're going to leave, and then you're going to have a
sure.
third system come in. That's what
Look
happened
what
to
just
Alex
happened in
Smith.
Tampa.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Liam Cohen's gone. It happened to Alex Smith. Now, granted, with the 49ers, like, granted, Alex Smith wasn't very good to start his career, but like they did cycle through a lot of offensive coordinators. Like
Sure.
he had a lot of like voices in his head throughout the years, and
Yeah.
that really disrupted his growth process until he got to Kansas City. Well, no, until he got with Jim Harbaugh and then Andy Reid.
Right.
Those two stable situations allowed him to like finally flourish and become like a decent quarterback. But he struggled for a long time because he had so many coaches. So that's the fear I have is
Yeah.
I don't know who the Jets are going to get a quarterback, and I did want to ask you about that, but like
Hmm.
we'll see what happens. Like if they have to cycle through these coaches, and John says if Sam Darnold didn't previously play for the Jets, would he be the number one free agent target in the quarterback? Like what are the Jets going to do a quarterback this offseason? Because it seems like a pretty bleak situation.
So I wonder if you agree with me on this, Walt, because A, you're outside the Jets bubble, and B, you know the NFL league wide better than most. In fact, better than the vast majority of people, I would say, because you have to cover it so closely year round. The way I look at the situation is realistically, the Jets are probably not going to win a lot of games. I mean, all right, I shouldn't say, I don't think they're necessarily going to be 3-14, but I wasn't expecting them to be all that great because reality of the situation is Rodgers comes back or not, which obviously he's not. We know that now. He just wasn't good anymore. He wasn't good enough. He was a bottom 10 quarterback. You would have needed a ton of things to go right for this team to make a playoff run in 2025, right? And so I think you look at this and you say, well, that being the case, is it really worth it to take all these dead cap hits over the next 2 to 3 years, 86.5 million, plus pay Devontae Adams and possibly Alan Lazard and all that
Mm-hmm.
for one more year of Aaron Rodgers, right? And so to me, the clear answer was no. And so you move on, and then what does that entail? Well, as you know, the list of available quarterbacks, not great. Now, you just mentioned Darnold, right? And that was in the super chat.
Yeah.
Darnold obviously is the best available quarterback at least, if you look at it on paper, based on the year he just had and his age and all that. But of course, he's definitely not coming back here, so he's not an option for the Jets. You look at the other potential options, and it's like, look, the Jets, as I said before, there was no pot of gold at the end of that rainbow because it looks like there's probably only two quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 10. Now, listen, anything can happen. Look at what happened with like Bo Nix and all that last
Right.
year. But likely it's Sanders and Ward, and they're probably not going to make it to seven. It's possible they don't even make it outside the top three or four. We'll see, I suppose. But then you look at the available trade and free agent candidates. Well, who is there? You got Kirk Cousins is going to be most likely have to be released. I can't imagine anybody's trading for him. And you'd only have to pay him the league minimum. Now, people pointed out Rick Spielman, who's now in the Jets front office, he's the one that went out and signed Cousins in Minnesota. He was not very good last year, but could he be a reasonable replacement for what the Jets got from Rodgers last year at a fraction of the price? Sure. He doesn't really give you any kind of tenable solution, but at least he's like a playable quarterback, I suppose. Like, bottom 10 starter most likely at this point, but it is what it is. You've got Tyrod Taylor, who's still in the mix. The one that to me is the one that makes the most sense, just given the situation, is Justin Fields. And I'm going to tell you why. Justin Fields, as we know, his passing has not been very good so far. It's been erratic to say the least. He's flashed from time to time, but he just hasn't put it together, and he may never. Look, he has trouble seeing the field. I think my friend Alex Rollins had a great way of putting it with Justin Fields. He looks, but he doesn't see, right? The thing with Fields, though, is as we've seen with guys like Darnold and Geno Smith, there's always that possibility. Now, granted, the odds are not like it doesn't make it likely. The odds are not great, but there's always that possibility that a guy like Fields, who we all agree had a high ceiling coming out of Ohio State, finally hits that ceiling. And the one thing that makes it intriguing in the short run is, listen, if you get him and he's not all that good passing the football, at least you're getting an elite runner, which is something because you know at least he can make plays with his legs, right? And the way I look at it is he's 25 years old. You bring him in. If it finally clicks and he hits his ceiling, maybe you've got another Sam Darnold situation like Minnesota had, where you're like, okay, maybe this could be the guy. More likely, you bring him in, you get an elite runner who flashes as a passer from time to time, and then at the end of the season, you move on and you go and make an aggressive move in the 2026 draft. But also remember this: Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields play together at Ohio State. Maybe there's a connection that can be rekindled there. And if the Jets, let's say they draft a quarterback, whether that's a guy in round one or two, the guys that I think would probably be the most likely to go in that range would be, at this moment at least, things can change, Jackson Dart and Jalen Milrow. If you think they're not ready to go day one, well, okay, if you bring in Fields, you're not going to be investing enough that it matters if you have to bench him for one of those guys midway through the season. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Is that Fields to me is the most intriguing of the options, and then I've seen people suggest Hendon Hooker. I don't think that's a terrible idea, depending on what Tanner Engstrand thinks of it. Because remember, the Lions brought Teddy Bridgewater back out of retirement rather than go to Hendon Hooker. So
Mhm.
that tells me that Ben Johnson didn't trust him, and Dan Campbell probably didn't trust him, but maybe Tanner Engstrand disagrees. Maybe Tanner Engstrand thinks that Hendon Hooker could be something. Now, granted, he's a little older. I think he's like 26, and he had those injuries. But I liked him a lot at Tennessee. So if um, if Tanner Engstrand likes him and thinks he could do something, and there's talk the Lions are possibly willing to deal him for next to nothing, maybe you bring him in and he's part of a competition with Jordan Travis and Tyrod Taylor or Fields or whoever. So I think those are the likely options. None of them are sexy. None of them are great. But as my buddy Gordon Damer, from formerly of ESPN Radio, said, Sometimes the flashy, sexy option is not actually the best option. Sometimes the best option is the one that is going to not make you all that excited in the short run, but maybe in the end it ends up being the best one. So that's sort of where I'm at with it. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Well, I have a silly idea, and I have an idea that I would actually do. So my silly idea is that we've seen a trend here where the highly drafted Jets quarterbacks struggle with the Jets, then they go somewhere else and succeed. Right? We had Geno Smith, like second round, but
Uh
still,
huh.
he struggled with the Jets. He went to Seattle and thrived. We saw it with Sam Darnold, struggle with the Jets. Went to a bunch of places, but then finally settled in Minnesota and had a great season until at least until the playoff game. Now, what if the Jets get ahead of this trend and the player at the top of the page here, Zach Wilson. He struggled with the Jets. He went somewhere else, and he could come back. So it sort of counts.
Yeah.
And he could become the next Jets quarterback who thrives after leaving the Jets, but he comes back. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't endorse that. What I would do is kind of like tank the season, but also give the fans a lot of fun. And so I think Jameis Winston might be the best option.
That's
Because
another one too. That's another one too. Yeah, for sure. He's a possibility for sure.
Because like, look, two things are gonna happen. Like, one, you're gonna have a ton of fun. Like, he's gonna throw
Yeah.
some like crazy passes. He's gonna have some like 41 to 38 games, like the one we saw with Denver Cleveland on Monday night. Then he's gonna have some games like there's five interceptions and like three of them go back for touchdowns. Um,
And he's
yeah,
also going to have some really fun press conferences.
yeah, and you know what? He's gonna keep the receivers happy because like they're gonna have some great stats. And,
Sure.
and so, I like look, this upcoming season doesn't count. Like I thought it was funny that you texted me the other day, like you saw my 2026 NFL mock draft order. And
Yeah.
like why do you have the Jets 25th? Have you like hit your head or something? I'm like, no, it was completely random order. So no, I would tank for the 2026 NFL draft because there's a chance that Arch Manning will come out. Now I've had like Texas fans like send me
That'd be
let's,
me.
let's just say like not very favorable replies to my 2026 NFL mock draft because they're like, there's no way Arch Manning is only going to play 1 year in Texas. Like he doesn't need the money. And to me, it's like if I'm Arch Manning, I'm playing the odds, right? Because like if a team that I'd want to go to has the number one pick, I think you come out. If it's like a Cleveland, like a loser franchise, like Cleveland, no offense, Browns fan, but like then I come back to school because like then I don't want to play for
Sure.
the Browns, right? But if it's the Jets or the Giants, like the city in which his uncle played, Eli Manning, then I'm like, yeah, I want to come out because if it's the Jets, you get Garrett Wilson, you get Brees Hall, like, and who knows, maybe they'll add another receiver. And if it's the Giants, you get Malik Neighbors, you get to play for the team, the actual team that Eli Manning played for. So that's where I stand with Arch Manning. I think it really depends on which team's drafted number one if he comes out. And it's really not any more about the money because you make money in school as well. So like that argument is gone.
Well, but also, Walt, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's quite a few other quarterbacks that could be high draft picks in next year's draft, too, no?
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, look, it's so far out that you just don't know at this point.
Sure.
But I think there are three quarterbacks in Charlie's top 16. If I'm actually four, I think there are four. Although I disagree with one, Drew Aller. Like now, I get why Charlie put him there because he has a ton of upside. And he's super young still, so like he can improve. But as a Penn State fan, I wouldn't take him in the first round. But
I'm with you on that.
yeah, the other three, they could definitely be in there. So yeah, I mean, you don't need the number one pick. And like we'll see.
Who are the three? Is one of them Levitt and then maybe Nussmeyer?
Nussmeyer, yes, Charlie has Nussmeyer there. He has Lenore Sellers in there as well,
Interesting.
and Arch Manning and Aller is the fourth. Or
Aller,
third.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't like Aller, but the other three I could definitely see.
Yeah.
And who knows? Like I think Aller's only 20, so like he could
He
really
could improve. You never
yeah
know.
yeah. I don't like his field vision. He has a ton of potential. He reminds me of like Will Levis. Like he's gonna be
Yeah.
drafted. Yeah, I think he's gonna be drafted in the second round, and I think his career will really depend on if he gets to join a team with a great like offensive coach. Like I feel like Will Levis right now would be a lot better if he was coached by like a Liam Cohen or Greg Olson or Sean McVay or Andy Reid. Like someone who could
Yeah.
get like his full potential. But like in Tennessee, he
Well,
just hasn't had that at all.
let me ask you this now. What do you think about Jackson Dart? Because he's becoming very polarizing character among Jets fans at this point. Where there's some Jets fans that are like, Dart would be whatever, and then there are other fans that are, no, he's another Zach Wilson. I was curious what you think about this because you talk to scouts and such. Like, what kind of read are you getting on him?
I think right now he goes in the second round.
Okay.
I think of it's probably the third quarterback off the board after in some order Cam Ward, Shador Sanders. I
Sure.
think it's gonna be him. Jalen Milrow was I've seen some people really talk up Jalen Milrow. I don't really see it. I don't like
I'm
him at
with
all.
you on that. I don't
Yeah,
like him at all.
I don't like him at all. Jackson Dart at least has I think he has a higher floor than Milrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean it's definitely not a finished product, and I mean that goes for most quarterbacks. But I think he
Sure.
has a lot. He needs great coaching as well because like his pocket presence sometimes is like so off. Like he's got the tools. Like he has the tools to be a starting quarterback. I just like the mental part of his game just not quite there.
Well,
So he needs to be coached up. He's another one of those guys. So
here's another one for you, Walt. Any chance that Ward or Sanders would fall to like 4 or 5? And if they did, and you're the Jets, would you make a move?
I think I think there's a chance Sanders might fall. I feel like Ward has been gaining favorability. Now it's still early in the process. Well, we got 2 months. I say it's early. The draft's gonna be here before we know it. Like that's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we still have the combine, we still have the pro days, so there's still a lot that
Right.
can happen. Um, the more I like listen and like and also like hear what Charlie's saying because I mean Charlie has all the sources like
Of course.
and he's gonna be on the show next week, so I can't wait for that. He's
The best in the biz.
no, he is 100%. Yeah, Ward, I feel like is going to be the first quarterback chosen right now. Now, like, again, a lot could change, but I think that people are. It's like I know the NFL is a copycat league, and I think that people are going to look at what Jaden Daniels did, and they're going to be like, oh
Yeah.
wow, let me find the next Jaden Daniels, and I think that
Sure.
Cam Ward definitely way more than Shador Sanders resembles that. And so
Yes.
Sanders
Agreed.
could fall as well because another reason is because Dion is going to dictate where he goes. And
Sure.
I really don't think Dion wants Shador Sanders to go to Tennessee because Dion was pretty vocal on his displeasure with how they handled the Rand Carthon firing. Like he was not happy about that. I don't know if maybe they rectify things. If Tennessee really wants him number one overall, I don't see that happening. And then if I'm Dion, I don't want him going to Cleveland either. So the Giants make the most sense. But if the Giants don't like him, then you got to start going
Or,
down
or
the
if the
board.
Giants trade up to get Cam Ward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that absolutely that could happen. And so you start going down the board. 4 New England, they don't need a quarterback. 5
Right.
Jacksonville, they don't need a quarterback. And then you have the Raiders, and then the Jets right behind the Raiders. And
Right.
so if the Jets want to leapfrog the Raiders, they could trade up to. I think the top 4. Yeah, you have Abdul Carter and you have Travis Hunter as the 2 non quarterbacks.
That's what I
So
was thinking. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that the trade that you want to do is with Jacksonville at 5 because I feel like Jacksonville, whoever they could take at 5, they could probably get at 7 too. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that makes a lot of sense. So moving from 7 to 5, like you don't have to give up a fortune or anything. It's not that big of a deal. So if the Jets like Shador Sanders enough, and I mean it really, that's what it really depends on. Like, how much do
Sure.
they like this guy? If they
Well,
fall in love with him, I think they could definitely make the move.
here's my thing, and you tell me if you agree. Two things about Sanders. First of all, I could be wrong. I know that everybody's going to say Dion would never let him play for the Jets, but Dion and Aaron Glenn were contemporaries. There's a great mutual respect between the two of them. I
Mhm.
feel like now that they've hired Glenn, he might not be. like Dion might not be all that against Shador playing for the Jets. I could be wrong. I'm just guessing. The other thing is, and I'd love to hear your take on this. My thought as a Jets fan is, granted, I think Cam Ward's the best QB in the draft, but I also think, like you said, he's going to go way beyond where the Jets could get him. Even though I don't think Sanders has like a super high ceiling, I think he's one of those like really high floor, like not super high ceiling guys. So, like, for example, I think his ceiling is probably like Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, um, Brock Purdy, that kind of range, right?
Hmm.
But I also think his floor is like maybe Ryan Tannehill, somebody like that, like a solid but not great starter. So like I don't think he's ever gonna necessarily be like an elite top five type of guy. But I also think that after all these disasters the Jets have had for so long, being able to get a quarterback that I'm relatively look, injuries can happen, so let's put that aside. We know what Shador's big weakness is. He holds the ball too long and sometimes he dances into sacks, right? And
Hmm.
that's something that needs to be fixed, but I think that's something that can be fixed without a ton of like. I don't think it would be brutal to fix. And he's got such a great football IQ. I just think the value of getting a guy who you're relatively sure at worst is gonna be like okay, having that high floor guy after all the disasters they've had in a row. There's a huge value to that to me, especially with this new regime trying to build a sustainable winner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I agree with you. I think he has a higher floor. That's the ceiling. I like Cam Ward's ceiling is much higher.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure.
right. And so there's a larger range of outcomes with Ward, but like Sanders, with his high football IQ, and I mean he has great leadership skills too. Like the players
Yeah.
really want to play for him. I think that's a big factor too. For a team that's rebuilding, that like the Jets are. It makes a lot of sense. I think that given that you can't get Cam Ward, I think that Sanders would be a really nice quarterback for you guys. Um, you know, get like just provided that you don't have to like give up a fortune for him. Like if the Jets trade up to 3 or 2, I think that would be a huge mistake. But if they only have to trade to 4 or 5, now I don't think they make a move in New England, but like with to 5 with
No.
Jacksonville, that I think that it makes a lot of sense to me too. Like, um, yeah. So and I think that I don't think that Dion would have an issue with Shador playing with the Jets. Like you said, he and Aaron Glenn, like they know each other, and I think he would like I think he would find that to be a nice home for his son, and also you have some weapons there, and you have some
Yeah.
pieces. You have Garrett Wilson, you have Brees Hall, you have some good players in the offensive line. It's not perfect, but the
No,
line
but
is
the O line is at least there's a stable foundation there,
right.
so it's something, you know.
Yeah, yeah. You have Fashanu, you have Elijah Vera Tucker. We'll see what happens to Tyron Smith. He's aging out, but like still, yeah,
John Simpson was pretty good last
yeah,
year. Joe Tippmann's a solid center.
yeah. No, they don't have a bad offensive line. So if I'm Dion, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good for Shador. So, um, yeah, no, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think Jacksonville might want one of the two Michigan defensive tackles, and they'll be able to get one of them at 7. So, um, or both of them might be there actually because the Raiders don't need a defensive tackle. So, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I wanted to ask you about Aaron Rodgers. It's kind of like
Uh-huh.
the final thing. Um, I know it's like sore subject, but like
No,
where do you think he ends up next year? As you said, bottom 10 quarterback or starting quarterback at least this year. I looked it up, and you were like right on the money. He was 23rd in EPA, so like right at he was the bottom 10, like right. He just made the cut. Now, like he would still like as bad as he played last year, he would still be an upgrade over some spots. Like for example, in Tennessee with Will Levis,
sure.
30. Will Levis was 37th in EPA, so he was not even a viable starter. Um, and like in Rodgers' defense, he was coming off a torn Achilles. Like
Sure.
in his second year, I think that there's a chance, despite his age, that he could play better than he did last year. So I think he could still be, maybe not bottom 10, maybe like bottom 15 starting quarterback, which for some teams that would work out. Where do you think that he would end up? Like, what do you think he's going to play next year?
Well, I will say this: you are right. He was coming off the Achilles, but one thing that would make me nervous and did as a Jets fan is that Rodgers was hurt repeatedly throughout the year. Now he played through the injuries, but there was constant injuries all throughout the year. And then you look at the torn Achilles, and then the fractured thumb in 2022, and he's going to be a year older. And these injuries, I think, are probably only going to get worse and more out of control. The question for me is, and I can't get in Aaron Rodgers' head, obviously, but my thought here is, okay, if you're Aaron Rodgers, you've got 4 MVP awards, you've got a Super Bowl MVP, a Super Bowl ring, you're going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. You threw over 500 touchdown passes. There's nothing else you need to prove at this point. You're easily a top 10 quarterback of all time, right?
Mm.
Do you want to go play in a place like Tennessee for a fraction of what you're used to making on a team that you know is bad? Do you want to maybe go to the Giants and be the bridge to, let's say, the Giants don't want Cam Ward to play for a few games if they get Cam Ward? Is that something you're interested in doing? Pittsburgh apparently doesn't have any interest, according to a bunch of reporters in that city. So I guess they're off the table. You just look around and there's just not a lot of spots that are open and like that would make any sense. Like, does Aaron Rodgers want to put his body through that for a Tennessee team that could very well finish last in their division, which is a bad division to begin with? I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that definitively because I can't get in Rodgers' head. But if it's me, I'm retiring. He's got interests outside of football. He's got more money than he can ever spend. Like we said, all the accolades you could ever want. Now, look, I don't know that he doesn't want to just play football. Maybe he wants to prove a point and be stubborn. I just don't really understand. Oh, well, okay, somebody mentioned the Raiders too. Like if they don't sign Darnold, I mean, again, the Raiders are not a good team. They're gonna. I mean, you would imagine they're probably finishing fourth in that division, right? The other 3 teams went to the playoffs this past year. You've got a rising Bo Nix. Herbert's one of the best in the league. Mahomes is Mahomes. You've got 3 guys that could very well wind up as Hall of Fame coaches. Obviously, Reed and Peyton would be shoo-ins, you would think. And Harbaugh certainly seems like he could be heading in that direction. So does Rodgers really want to do that? I just don't know that there's any spot that makes any sense for him. So I suppose maybe Tennessee, maybe the Raiders, maybe the Giants, but I don't know, Walt. Maybe I'm crazy. You tell me. Does that make any sense for him at this point?
I mean, look, it doesn't. You're right. There's no open team that has interest in him that would like be a playoff contender. But if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I think that I can rebound, instead of being the 23rd best quarterback in the NFL as a starter, maybe like the 18th or 17th, like coming off, another year removed from the torn Achilles. And so, I mean, like this is his livelihood too. So he may just want to squeeze one more year out of it. I do think retirement is certainly an option. There's been a lot connecting him to Tennessee. Like, first of all, he's really good friends with one of the front office people that the Titans hired. The 2 of them were together in Green Bay. I heard some rumors. I can't confirm this is being true, but Rodgers was talking to or hanging out with with the new Titans GM, and also he has property in Nashville.
Yeah.
So like, and I feel like if he does play somewhere, that would make the most sense.
I also
They
heard he's a huge Nate Bargatze fan. No, I'm just kidding.
no, I mean, like they at least have Calvin Ridley's a big name. Like if I'm Rodgers and my options are limited, like I hear Calvin Ridley there, and like Ridley's had some big seasons. Like I'm thinking, okay, this doesn't seem that bad. They drafted a tackle in the first round last year, so maybe they can protect me. I don't know. I mean, like the options aren't great as you detailed, but
Right.
I think if he lives in Tennessee then why not play for Tennessee? I don't
Like
know. I think that's what makes the most sense to me.
if he
Um,
really wants to just play football, I get it. But I don't know. If it were me, I just can't imagine wanting to, at 42 years old with all those injuries, wanting to put my body through that
yeah.
for that Tennessee team. But look, he may, like you said, he may just want to play. Maybe he doesn't feel like his story is over yet. Like I said, I can't, he's not one of these guys where we can really get in his head. He dances to the, or marches to the beat of his own drummer.
Yeah. No, I think another possibility that he could do is just wait it out and wait for an injury.
He
Like
could, yeah, sure.
like what if Tua Tagovailoa goes down again?
Hmm.
Like Miami wouldn't make a lot of sense, and you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle,
Get
um,
revenge on the Jets.
Devon Achane. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Sure.
And even if I'm Miami, I'm like Tua's one concussion away from maybe being done forever. It makes sense to have a good backup. Like they didn't have that this year. Like they tried it out. Our friend Tim Boyle
Oh,
for a game.
boy.
That was like I had a big bet on Miami in that game. And as soon as their quarterback went down, I'm like, wait, who's coming in? They're like,
Yeah.
the announcer like Tim Boyle's coming in. I'm like, oh my god, like they have no chance here. So like 0% to win. So yeah, I don't. Again, I think Tennessee makes the most sense, but yeah, he can wait. So yeah, I mean, it's I think we covered the Jets and the Aaron Rodgers situation pretty well. I know you're on vacation, so I don't want to like keep you
No,
keep
man,
you too long.
I'm good. I'm good whenever I'm just chilling, talking to my buddy Walt. No big deal.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming on because, like I said, you're on vacation and everything. We always talk about like video games at the end. I don't know if you've had any time. I have a rule for myself. I don't play any video games during the football season. But now that the season's over, I actually like whipped out my Switch for the first time. I actually ordered a PS5. But so that actually just arrived today. So I'm gonna have some fun with that. But I discovered this game called Ori. It's kind of an older game. I don't know how, like it's not that old, but my sister got it for me for my birthday, which was in August, which goes to show like how long it's been. That game is incredible. It reminds me of Metroid. I don't know if you've ever played Metroid, for the original Nintendo. Um,
Sure.
it's Metroid is basically you're going around like this big labyrinth. You're basically shooting aliens the entire time. This is the same thing. Like it's like this huge area, and you acquire new abilities, and like with those abilities you can access new places. Like it's a big place. It's a really cool game. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I don't know if you have any time to play any video games, but
Well, you know what is funny? Well, I'll tell you, I haven't used it in a while, but I actually got the Sega Genesis Classic where
mm,
you buy the it's like $25 and it comes with all these old Genesis games and stuff.
yeah,
And it reminded me of I remember for Christmas, God, this was so long ago now. I had wanted a Sega Genesis and I got it for Christmas and I got the Sonic the Hedgehog game came with it. And I just remember spending like most of Christmas afternoon playing Sonic the Hedgehog, you know?
nice.
Um, and then I remember at the time the two big systems were Genesis and Super Nintendo, right?
Yep,
So I wanted Super Nintendo because there were certain games you couldn't get on Genesis and all that. One of them was Final Fight, which I loved. Do you remember that game at the arcade? Final
yeah,
Fight?
mm-hmm.
So I love that game. So I remember getting the Super Nintendo. I saved up for it specifically because of Final Fight, and then I would like alternate days whether I wanted to play Super Nintendo that day or whether I wanted to, play Genesis that day or whatever. That was a lot of fun, man. I saw some kid wearing a Sonic the Hedgehog shirt the other day, and I was joking with his parents. I said, "Man, that makes me feel so old. I don't even want to tell you how old I was when I got that game." And they were laughing. They're like, "Yeah, don't even say it. Don't do that to yourself." So I
Oh,
actually I don't play any of the newer stuff, believe it or not. I mostly just play the old classic games. And my brother actually, who lives in Vegas, he has in his house one of those machines, those the old school machines, but it's got like a ton of old arcade games programmed into it. So it's
okay.
really cool. Like you could play like the old Ninja Turtles game, or you could play like arcade version of Legend of Zelda, that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
I always love that. And you mentioned the original Nintendo, man. I still remember the graphics were terrible, but I remember coming home every day and trying to like beat Legend of Zelda because who didn't love Legend of Zelda back then? Oh, I got to
Mhm.
save up my points to get a boomerang or whatever it was, right?
Yep.
And then I remember loved playing the old WrestleMania game, which had the worst graphics ever. But you could be like Andre the Giant and just squash everybody, which was awesome. Uh, Man, those were the days. And then regular Sega. What was the game I used to love to play on regular Sega? I'm trying to remember. There was one. It was like one of these fighting games, and then I think Sega had like it was like this terrible. The graphics were terrible. It was just like this like NFL football game. I used to love playing that. And then I don't even think they had the rights to the players' names, so it was like you had to like you knew who it was though. So you'd be like, oh, number 19 on the Jets. That's Keyshawn Johnson or whatever.
Right.
So. That stuff was great, and when they released the classic, where it's like $25 and you can get all the games into one console, I was like, I gotta buy this.
That's awesome. Um, I, uh, you mentioned, well, first of all, you mentioned the Sonic shirt. My son has Sonic pajamas, so
There you go.
yeah. I get what you're saying. That it makes you feel old. Zelda was great. I used to
Oh,
have two friends, Joey and Josh. We were like second grade together. We used to like get off the bus and we used to just go to Joey's house in his basement and just play Legend of Zelda until like
oh
dinner
yeah.
time. And there was no internet back then. Obviously, I mean, we're seven, so like we wouldn't have access to that anyway, probably. But still, like we didn't know like how to look up like where the dungeons were, and so
Of
we
course.
we would spend like the entire afternoons like trying to figure out where like level 7 was, and like yeah, you have to play the flute in that lake without the fairy, like that's what we were trying to figure out the entire time, and like figuring out like together, like brainstorming the three of us like together, like where these dungeons were. That was so fun.
Oh yeah.
Like
Or how about what was that? Tyson's Punch Out. There's another one. You remember that?
yeah, yeah. That was a tough game. Real quick, you mentioned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade games, right?
Yeah.
My another game my sister got me for I don't know if it was like last Christmas or my birthday. She got me a it's a PS4 game that has all the Ninja Turtle games ever made on it. So
Oh, that's awesome.
I initially thought it was just the arcade games, but it also has like the first Ninja Turtles on Nintendo. That's like impossible to beat. And actually, I tweeted out like when I saw the screenshot, I was like, "This is giving me PTSD." It was
Yeah.
like those like electric things underwater, and then like you get run over on the next level by those tractors. It's so brutal. But the first game I played when I loaded that disc up was TMNT2, like the first beat 'em up game on the Nintendo. And as a kid, I used to like beat that game in my sleep. It was so easy. And I thought that like, hey, I'm gonna spend an hour here, just gonna beat it real quick, just have like good memories. I don't know what happened to me. I died on the first level of this.
Yeah.
In my first, like, I eventually got to like the last level, and I eventually ran out of life. So I feel like if I played like two or three more times, I'll beat it. But I don't know what happened. Like the first level, I just like kicked my butt. Like I was it was so brutal. I died at Rocksteady killed me. The first boss of the first level. I just couldn't beat him.
Oh man.
So that was
Yeah,
a lot of
those were the classics, man. Like, it's funny because everybody does that thing where they romanticize the stuff from when they were younger.
oh
But like, I
yeah.
really do feel like that was the best stuff. You know what I mean?
Member berries. Member berries are the best. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, no, there is something to it because you remember your childhood was all great and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the video the graphics sucked. Like and now those graphics suck, but like back then that was like cutting edge technology.
Oh
So
yeah. You
yeah,
remember they were like, "Oh my God, these are 16-bit graphics
I
for
know.
Super Nintendo. It's just like the arcade."
Yeah, no, I mean Donkey Kong Country, like they heralded those graphics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, by the way, you mentioned the Genesis thing, the console. I had the Super Nintendo version of that, and the biggest whiff is that they didn't include Donkey Kong Country 2, which I like
Yeah,
one of the best games of all
yeah.
time. Like it was, I don't know why that didn't make the cut. That was
Oh
one of the
man,
best. Yeah,
Donkey Kong. Oh man, here's another one. You remember when Game Boy came out? That was the game changer, man.
yeah,
Game
yeah.
Boy and then Sega Game Gear, which was so like for anybody that doesn't remember, Game Gear was black and white, and then Game Gear came out and that was color. So you're like, oh my god, you mean I could be like at school and I could play video games at school, or like I could be
Yeah,
on a trip somewhere and I could be at like the pool playing video games. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard of. It's amazing. Like
I
I'm
know.
trying to remember some of the games that I had back then, but like I know I had like RBI baseball, if you remember that game.
Hmm.
Tetris was like the all timer. Like Tetris was the perfect game when like you're like, my parents are picking me up in an hour. You're like, all right, I'll play Tetris till they come get me, something
Right,
like
right.
that. Or so that, yeah, dude, I love Tetris, all that stuff. But that was such a dude. I remember for Christmas one year. So like one year I'd gotten a Game Boy or a Game Gear, and then like one year I got a portable TV, and I
Nice.
just remember how excited I
I
was because
remember that. I
we,
remember guy going too.
dude, I got one of those little Watchman TVs, right? And I remember how excited I was because the playoffs were on and we were going to be in the car. And I was so pissed. I didn't want to listen on the radio. Well, now I had this portable TV. Now, as you remember, getting consistent reception
Oh,
on those
terrible,
portable TVs,
terrible.
not very, yeah, it's not
Very
good.
tough.
But I just felt so lucky because I remember, in fact, watching the the Buffalo comeback against the Oilers with Frank Reich on one of those portable Watchman TVs in the car. It was amazing. Like I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever,
I remember thinking like, oh, I can't wait till they get cable on this, and it's
Right.
like they don't like that. I don't have to worry about the bad reception.
Imagine
No,
if I would have told you then that on your phone you could watch anything anywhere, or that you could
yeah,
be on a plane flying to like Australia and be watching like, dude, I was on a flight. I was literally watching. I watched like an entire season or half a season of a TV show on the
yeah,
flight. It's incredible the stuff that you can get now.
it's crazy. I mean, like what you mentioned, Game Boy not having color, and then Game Gear, like, oh, they have color. It's a big
Yeah.
deal. Like now
Oh my
on
god,
your phone, you could download any game, and you can watch
dude. Do you remember
anything.
what a
Like you see,
game changer like Napster was and all that? Now
oh
you
yeah,
tell me any album or any song, I'll go on YouTube and pull it up immediately.
yeah, it's crazy. You can listen to anything. It used to take like a half an hour to an hour to download one song
Oh
on
yeah.
Napster, and then like if someone called you, like the download would be interrupted because you were
Oh
on
man.
modem. It was so brutal. Like you'd be like, please, no one call, no one call. You like I remember downloading music at like 11 p.m. because like I knew people wouldn't call at that hour. But like once in a while they would call. I'd be like, screw you. Like, I
Dude,
want
I
my
remember
music.
when I first got a cable modem. It was the coolest thing ever because it meant that I could download all my songs.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
then
now it's like, who even thinks of that? Everything's wireless. Like it's so funny, man. Like
I know.
some of this stuff astounds me. Like I was in the I forget where I was, and I needed headphones, and somebody gave me these. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? They're like, oh, they're like Bluetooth headphones. They connect, and then like all you got to do is put them in your ear, and they automatically turn on. I'm like, are you serious? Like, yeah. I'm like, this is the craziest. But dude, that's technology, man. It never stops, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although sometimes there are missteps. Remember Virtual Boy?
Oh
I,
yeah, yeah.
I rented it from Blockbuster. Well, speaking of old things, I rented it from Blockbuster
Oh,
one weekend, and it was
dude,
like
you
the big.
remember
Yeah,
having to
go ahead.
like fist fight somebody at Blockbuster for a movie on a Friday night?
Yeah, or video game, like
Oh
praying it would
yeah.
be there. I actually had this idea. Let me run it by you before we head out. So there's no need for Blockbuster anymore, obviously. But like, what if like instead of like if you go on like Netflix, you're like scrolling left and right. What if there's like a virtual thing, a virtual reality, you put it on and you're in a Blockbuster. So instead of scrolling, you get to like walk through the aisles and like pick out like what movie or video game like you want to watch or play. Um, I think that would be pretty neat.
I,
I don't
I'm
know.
I, I'm down with it. By the way, there is one Blockbuster left. I think it's in like Portland or something.
Yeah, I heard of that. Blockbuster could have bought Netflix. They had the opportunity to do so.
Yep.
And yeah, I actually
Well,
had that same idea with like Toys R Us. Like Toys R Us went out of business. Like I thought it'd be cool to like put on just like a headset and just like walk around in like a Toys R Us. Like like obviously you're not gonna do as like an adult, but like with my kid, like I think he'd have a blast just like looking for toys. It was like I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to take me to Toys R Us for both Christmas and my birthday, and he used to be like, "Okay, you have $100 to spend. Just pick whatever you
right.
want. Pick whatever you want. Like go to $100." And then like I would always be a little over because of tax. So he would be okay with that. But like I remember like calculating. I'm like, wait, this is 50. This is 30. I have 80, 20 left. Like I'd be like 94, and I tried to find like $1 things to like just add up to 100. I like be right there at the limit. But that no, that was so much fun, and like now they don't have that anymore. They have like online
No.
shopping. So like if you bring back like the virtual headset and you get to shop around, you're like, okay, I want my son's doing it. I want that toy. It adds it to your cart, and then you check out, and then it's delivered to
Well,
you. I think that'd be fun.
well, well, it's like, dude, with like albums and stuff, man. We used to have liner notes and
Hmm.
all this cool stuff, and now everything is digital. And I miss the old stuff. Like I still have all my old CDs and vinyl records
Yeah,
and
mine are
cassettes
right
and
up
all
there.
that.
Yep.
But I also I just like you said, there's a certain thing that like is just missing from not having. But then again, it's funny because each generation kind of like so when we had the CDs, it's like, oh well, in my day we had the records and these CDs sound too digital and clean and that. And then now it's like, oh well, we had CDs and they had booklets and you guys all you have is your digital downloads or you had an iPod. Like dude, we went from iPod. Now no one even has that. Everybody just has everything on their phone. It's
Hmm.
just it's wild, man. It's so funny. And like you said, I kind of dig that idea. What if you could do like a virtual reality game and it's for like people that are nostalgic, where like you said, you're walking through a blockbuster on a Friday night looking for some video game or movie, right? Or next after that, you're at a Roy Rogers ordering a burger and fries or something, right?
Oh man.
And then from there you go to try and think of like another example of a company. Oh, you're walking through like a JC Penney or something or whatever, an A&P grocery store, it'd just
Mhm.
be kind of a cool nostalgia trip. By the way, you mentioned Blockbuster not buying Netflix. There's a lot of examples of that. I think was it Google? No, not Google. Yahoo that bought Tumblr instead of buying Instagram. So that's one I'm sure that
That's
they
pretty
wish
bad.
they had done differently. I think that was the story or something like that. They bought Tumblr instead of some other platform that turned out to be like huge. So, um, yeah, it's pretty funny, man. It is wild because I still remember when Netflix started. I thought it was kind of cool, but if you remember, it was mail order. So what you would do was you could get up to five at a time. You pay a monthly fee and they'd send you DVDs and then you would watch them and send them back. You had like X amount of time. But I told my friend, I'm like, you know what you do? You burn a copy and then you send it back, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is cool, but like, I don't know. It's kind of inconvenient. You got to mail it, all this stuff. Once they started the thing where you could stream it right through your TV, I'm like, this is game over. And
Yeah.
then I remember, and Walt, you're a big stock guy. I was seriously considering investing a ton in Netflix when they announced that they had gotten the rights to another season of Arrested Development because I'm like, whoa, this is a game changer. Not
Yeah.
only do they have original programming, but they have an established show that people already like.
Hmm.
I'm like, Netflix is going to kill it. And then, of course, I didn't invest, and God only knows how much I would have made, but that's another story. Um, but yeah, dude, that was the game changer when they were like, we could do this streaming. And I remember a friend of mine I used to work with, and, you know, rest his soul because he passed away a few years ago. But this had to be a dozen years ago or more. He
Hmm.
said to me he was selling cable at the time. and he said, "Dude, we're I don't know when." He goes, "It's not that far away. Everything, everything is going to come through the internet. Like shows, it's not even going to be like a show is on at a certain time. You're gonna be able to just watch a series. Like, dude, he knew this years before
Yeah.
this stuff started happening, like the binging of shows, and he was like, dude, you're gonna watch everything's gonna come straight through the internet. You're not even gonna need cable, wire, all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know. You really think so? Because I'm telling you, because I don't know when, but it's gonna happen. And I mean, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer and closer by the day.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the last time I think people collectively watched a show at the same time was Game of Thrones. Um, like, because that was like appointment television. It was like 9 o'clock on Sundays.
Well, and that
But
was one of those shows too, and I wasn't a fan of it, so I didn't watch it. But
mm,
I know that like people would go and talk about it, so like you had to watch it live almost because everybody was going to talk about it. Otherwise,
yeah,
they would spoil it for you.
oh yeah, it's terrible. I did mute some people because like I was, I think there was one day where I couldn't, like, something happened where I had to watch it like at 10:30 or something, and I went on Twitter, like people were like talking about it. I did like mute people. I've never blocked anyone on Twitter. I don't even mute people for anything, but like for spoilers, that did it. I was like I can't see this. If
Yeah.
you're gonna spoil stuff, I just have to mute you. Um,
Well, it's like
last,
I remember Jimmy Kimmel, who I'm not a big fan of because he's one of those guys. He was really funny back in the day, and
yeah, I mean,
now
man, yeah,
he's just like a what's the best way to put this? He's kind of like a just like a cookie cutter, boring whatever. Now he's not funny anymore like he used to be. He used to be like edgy. But anyway, I remember he did a bit on that with Game of Thrones because I guess there was like a big spoiler or something that happened in the show, and he's like, he goes, you know what I hate? He goes, these people they'll post, I can't even. Well, if you can't even, then don't even. And that always made me laugh because it's true. Like these people, like I can't. It's like no, man. Like you really don't have to do this. Like don't spoil stuff for people.
yeah. When you were describing Jimmy Kimmel, I thought you were gonna say whiny douche. That's how I would
Oh,
describe
yeah, I
him.
mean, listen, I don't watch him enough to really know. I just know that like the clips I see, he just comes across as like very like cookie cutter and stock and like you know what I'm saying? Like there's a very like basic like I don't know. I think when Conan O'Brien first came on the scene, there was like an edginess to him, and part of it is probably because he was on at 12:30 in the morning.
Mhm.
Jimmy Kimmel, when he did radio back in the day, when he did the Man Show, there was like an edginess to him. Um, even back in the day when he was on real late, Letterman had an edginess to him. Back when he was on after Carson, but
Mhm.
a lot, and I think this is part of why I don't really like late night now. And part of it is like, let's be honest, when years ago we didn't really have options, so it's like, oh, you got Johnny Carson or you
Yeah.
got like Arsenio Hall. And look, not to throw shade because I love Johnny Carson and I love Arsenio Hall, and they were funny, they were really good, they had great guests and stuff. But these shows now, it's like I have so many choices. It's like, and like you said, we don't have to watch stuff live now. So like to me it's whatever, but that's the only thing that I remember Jimmy Kimmel in recent years saying that made me laugh was when he was talking about people spoiling shows like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it feels like all the late night shows now, all they do is like complain about Trump, and like Jimmy Kimmel just like whines and cries the entire time. It's just so bad. Did you guys like Monster Vision? A lot asks love to eat. I've never seen it, so I don't know if you ever saw it. But
I don't know what it is. What is Monster Vision?
it was a show that was on in the '90s. I never saw it, but I
Wow,
heard about it.
okay. Yeah,
Oh
no, it's funny. I never heard of that. But it kind of sounds like so because you remember all those Nickelodeon shows in the '90s,
oh
right? Like Are You Afraid of the Dark and
oh
Salute Your
yeah.
Shorts and oh, dude, how about the OG one? You remember You Can't Do That on Television?
Oh man, that was so great. They used to get
Tremendous.
slimed all the time. Like
Oh yeah,
it's so,
yeah, yeah. And
it's
Alanis
so great.
Morissette got her start on that show.
Yeah, I always wanted to be on the show. I always wanted to be on Legends of the Hidden Temple. That was like I used to always get so angry at those kids who used to like go into the temple. Like the prize would be at the top level. So they try to go on the top level. It's like, come on, they're not going to make it that easy for you. Like you have to go underneath, you have to go around. Like I used to just like yell at the TV. It's like, you idiots. They're actually like there are videos on YouTube where like they have like the best runs from the temple and the worst runs from the temple. Like the worst runs are pretty hilarious.
How about Clarissa explains it all? Who didn't have a crush on Melissa Joan Hart back then?
Oh yeah, I mean absolutely. Um, my childhood crush was Christine Lakin. Who was the Al
Oh
from
yeah, Al
Boy
from
Meets
Step
World.
by Step. Sure. Yeah.
Step by step. Boy Meets World. Yeah,
Yeah. No, well, listen, man. My first. Well, okay. People that know me won't be surprised by this. They already know, but people that know me now that may not have ever heard me say this won't be surprised by it either. I think my two first real major crushes. I mean, and there were the obvious ones too. Like obviously, who didn't have a crush on Tiffany Amber Thiessen, right?
right.
But Whitney Houston
Okay.
and Robin Givens, who eventually ended up married to Mike Tyson for a little while. But you remember Head of the Class? She was on that, and oh
Yeah.
my God, I was absolutely in love with her. And also, I mean, who wasn't in love with Whitney Houston?
Yeah. 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 For sure. I mean, yeah. By the way, last time. Last thing before we go. So this is my final pitch to you, and I think it's my best one.
Okay,
How about a like a hotel that's a retro hotel, 80s or 90s,
okay.
and so you go down to the lobby and you have a Roy Rogers there. You have a Pizza Hut that was like the original. They had the red cups and the salad bar and like the and all that. And they have a Blockbuster where like you get a DVD or a CD like complimentary, like the person was complimentary for the night, and you take it up and watch it, like just like retro hotel, like yeah, I'm sure there's so many things you can think of that make it
Oh
retro.
yeah. Or how about a retro cafe, like an '80s cafe where you go in and like everybody, they just play '80s music, and then
Yeah,
like everybody talks like they live in the '80s, like calling everything gnarly and rad or whatever, and
yeah,
everything on the walls is like stuff from like '80s movies and TV shows and stuff. Or you could do this with the '90s too. Either
yeah.
way, I think that would be pretty damn cool.
The best restaurant near me is this place called Nifty Fifties, which is a 50s restaurant.
Oh,
um
that sounds awesome.
yeah, it's great. Like everything's 50s. Like yeah, they have like 100 types of like soda. They have like these great milkshakes. Their burgers
Oh,
are like
can you get
they
it?
come
Can you
in.
get an egg? Can you get an egg cream there too?
Probably like
Oh,
they dress like the 50s. It's
that's
like the
awesome.
whole thing's like the 50s. And it's kind of crazy that like when I was growing up, we used to go there. Like my mom used to take us there all the time. So this is late 80s, early 90s. I used to go there, and that's
Where's this place? I feel like I need to go there.
there are a couple of them. If you look online, Nifty Fifties. There might be one in New Jersey,
Okay,
but there are a couple here around me in the suburbs of Philly. There's actually one on the Boulevard, right on the
ooh,
Boulevard of Grant.
okay.
Um, and the only downside to that one is like the wait is like an hour and a half to get seated. That's
Oh,
like that's how popular this place is. But
wow.
there are new ones that are larger and they don't have a wait time. So you don't want to go to the Boulevard and Grant one. You want to go to like there's one in Jenkintown, which is here. But like I said, I think there's one in New Jersey as well. So like you might be able to find that there.
Sounds like a place that might have to meet you at one of these days, Walt.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, 100%. But my point though is that like we used to, my parent, like I said, my mom used to take me and my sister there in the late 80s and early 90s. So this was about 40 years removed, right? So we're
Right.
talking now. We're in the 20s. 40 years removed from that is the 80s. So like
Yeah.
it is about that time that we do get an 80s style restaurant. So I'm on board with that 100%.
You know
Um,
what? One day when we have like, I don't know, Jeff Bezos money or something, we're gonna open this restaurant.
Yes, 100%. We'll definitely do it. All right. Like I said, you're on vacation, so enjoy it. Thanks so much, Scott, for coming on. You want to plug Play Like a Jet, or I could do for you first. Definitely, if you're a Jets fan, check out Play Like a Jet, the podcast. It's set like Scott said before, 7 days a week, or playlikeajet.com. It is the best team podcast and and everything. So like if you like the Jets or you're interested in just football talk, you should listen to Play Like a Jet. I'm on during the season. Definitely check it out. But do you want to talk about it some more?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, if you like Walt, hopefully you like our show because Walt's on it quite a bit, especially during the season. We talk about gambling and stuff, and I'm sure we'll talk draft as soon as we get through this free agency stuff, and we'll probably talk free agency too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, 7 days a week of Jets content, which is probably why I am going to wind up in a mental institution sooner rather than later. We've got videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/play like a jet. And like I said, the main thing with the show is we do 7 days a week, but I try to do things that I myself as a Jets fan would like. So, like I said, when they were doing the head coach and general manager searches, I was doing deep dives on all these candidates because as a Jets fan, that's what I would have wanted.
Yeah.
So I kind of like to do it that way. And then during the season and during the draft stuff, oh, the draft stuff is going to be funny this year. We'll see how that winds up going. We'll probably wind up doing a ton of stuff in the lead up to free agency as well as far as like what they could do at quarterback and all those things. Right now, we're doing off-season roundtables, and what I do with those is I get people that are, uh, I guess you would say they're in or out of the Jets bubble, but like sometimes it's somebody who's a big Jets fan that is known for something else. But so I'll give you an example. There's a guy named Rob Sesternino who was on Survivor twice, and he has like a super successful reality show podcast. He's a huge Jets fan, so he comes on and he'll talk Jets in the off season. Or uh, I've had on in the past Vinny Pasquantino, who's the first baseman for the Royals. He's a huge Jets fan, so he's come on before and talked Jets in the offseason. There's a variety of different examples of this, but I like to do that. We get different voices just to talk about sort of like what you and I were talking about, Walt. What went wrong in 2024? What are they going to do in 2025? What are the thoughts on the past regime and the new regime? Has Woody Johnson learned his lesson? What might they do at quarterback now? So on and so forth. So we cover everything. And like I said, the videos are at youtube.com/play like a jet. You can follow me on Twitter at play like a jet1. We've got our store at T Public. That's teepublic.com. And Walt, we're going to have to do that jersey swap where I'll
100%.
send you a Play Like a Jet shirt. You send me a Walter football shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down for it. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. All right, Scott. Thank you so much for coming on. Check out Play Like a Jet. And please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video. Visit the link in the description for the merch store. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be discussing some more Super Bowl 60 futures. And also, we're going to be talking about the golf tournament, the Mexico Open. We're going to be joined by the golf guys, at least one of them. I don't know if both are coming on, but at least one of them. So it'll be a good time. Then Thursday we're going to have another guest, and Saturday Tom's going to be on. So full week this week. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for listening, commenting. Really appreciate it, and have a great night. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.